Welcome back to the podcast. Today is about music appreciation, and we're jamming with Lyndol Descant, composer of two of my movie scores and the composer, songwriter of extremely diverse and interesting music, which I'll link to in the description. I download all her songs as she releases them, and so, of course, we're bringing her on the podcast for the second time, and this is a different kind of episode than we've normally had, so please enjoy. If you're watching on YouTube, note that this is audio only, so you're not missing anything if you don't see any video whatsoever. Hi, Lyndol.
Hey, Eric.
How's it going?
It's all right. It's all right.
So, I've been obsessed with... So I learned guitar back my freshman year of high school, and I was obsessed with it for like 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then when I went off to film school, I sold most of my instruments to pay for books. And then I never really got back into it with the intensity that I had before. And I'd gone through several acoustic guitars in my adult life, and I'm starting to find it again as an obsession. And one of the things I've been looking at is the way I used to play certain songs, and kind of the way they're taught, or maybe the way that people are used to playing them versus the kind of the real way they should be played. And one of the things that I discovered recently is, and I sent you an audio clip of this some weeks ago, Jack and Diane.
Yeah.
So John Mellencamp wrote this song as like a 3-chord song. It's basically A, E, and D. Little ditty about Jack and Diane. And that's how I learned it. That's how I was taught it. That's how everybody back home played it. And then over the years, I would learn to open up some strings. So maybe the E wouldn't be a full E. I'd open up the A string. So then it'd just be this chord. Little ditty about Jack and Diane. Something about that open A. I didn't know quite what it was. We're gonna be segueing into some theory that I'm discovering on my own accord here. And then like 10 years ago, I changed the D to this weird version of a D. So it's like, we're starting to sound closer to the recording. Mm-hmm. So I learned a few weeks back that actually, even though John Mellencamp wrote it as a 3-chord song, the guy who actually did the guitar work and sort of re-engineered it was David Bowie's guitarist. His name is Mick Ronson. Mm-hmm. He's passed away now, but he took this 3-chord song and he turned it into sort of, it's the same 3 chords, but depending on whether you're playing the verse, the interlude, the chorus, or the hook, the 3 chords are played differently, and they're played as triads. Mm-hmm. So the verse is actually played over here like this. The interlude is played like this. It's the same 3 chords. And I'm just fascinated by this sort of discovery, and it's sort of enhanced this obsession I've been falling into ever since we wrapped Fractals. That you can take these 3-chord pop songs and just make them much more complex than they would be otherwise. I had never thought about triads or anything like that, or playing the same 3 chords up here on the neck that you would typically play here.
So, yeah, well, I mean, so triads, I mean, you've been playing triads. You just didn't think of them as triads, because triads are everything, right? Except really 7th chords, which are more, you know what 7th chords are?
No, so that's my problem.
So triads is interesting because some people get real spiritual with it too, because it's 3, the number 3, and it's a 3-note chord as a triad, right? But really, I've always considered that the building block of music, modern music, is the triad. Now, a 7th chord is more, it's a little bit misleading to say 7th chord because it's really a 4-note chord. But what it's doing is adding in the 7th note of the scale, right? Because if you have a scale, so let's say you're playing C major scale, you play the 1, the 3, and the 5th note, and that's your triad, right? If I added the 7th note of that scale, now that's a 7th chord. And that's where you get a little bit more tension, a little bit more jazzy. But really triads are the building block of everything. But where people get it wrong with music, and we all do this, is you think like the more complicated the chord, a lot of jazz people think this way, like the more changes you have, the more complicated chord structures and progressions you have, then the cooler the music. But in reality, when you're sitting on like like a 3-chord progression like that, there's so many other elements to music that you can use to express. So you're talking about, I'm translating everything more so to the piano, right? The way I think of it. So one thing is tessiture. What octave are you playing something? Then you're talking about voicings. How are you playing the chord? Because if you just have a chord symbol, then you have the freedom to play that chord symbol any way you want. So how are you playing the chord? And then you get into these variations. It sounds like to me, I'd have to sort of figure out exactly on the piano what you're doing on the guitar, but it sounds to me like you're talking about, like a sus chord instead of a major or minor triad, right? Like you're substituting the third note for a second or a fourth, that you might be more, just the voicings is everything. Yeah. And what I always love is that in reality, it's a lot harder to be creative that way. If some people think, well, it's like really easy to play music that way, but it's really easy for that music to be boring. But what's interesting is when you're in there with these 3 chords, and then now you're creating and expressing on top of that with the other elements you have in music, like your touch, your dynamics, the tessiture, like how you're voicing it, and then doing things like that where you're arranging on the spot. Like I'm imagining, I don't know what this guitarist thought when he came up with these voicings, but I imagine like you want the chorus to sound different from the verse, right? You're arranging in your mind with your instrument to make these elements stand out or be different from one another. So that's one of the fun things is over the years, like being able to get to a place where you can do that on the spot even. But at the same time, then it goes to the other side of it where you're arranging and you come up with something that works really well, so you stick with it, right? And I think that's what you're excited about. Does this speak to what you're excited about?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I love that we're unpacking it though, because I wasn't sure what we were actually going to do with this episode. Which I don't think you did either. But I'm just like, we'll start with my obsession and go from there.
Yeah.
But like, I also feel like he's figured out how to kind of harmonize with what else is going on in the song.
True. Yes.
Because the way he's doing those high notes, that's also how they're singing.
Yeah. And it's simple things that make it sound really good. But simple isn't always easy. Yeah. That's what's funny. Like you might be able to understand it, but to actually have the skill to put it together. But exactly, because you've got to find your space in the mix. That's the arranging part, right? Like if you're with a band, then you've got to find where you sonically are going to fit in. And one of the hardest things to play with as a pianist, if I play with another guitarist, we get in each other's way a lot, right? And so the more skilled musicians know how to get out of each other's way and give each other space. And these are all these sort of unwritten rules that aren't really complicated to talk about, but to have the experience in the room in the moment to do these things, because a lot of people, when they're new to music, they're just thinking about the actual chord changes. And they're not able to think beyond that of like, where am I playing the chord? How am I playing the chord? How does it sound with everything else? And so it just goes back to that idea. That's one of the reasons why I'm obsessed with music still, because the more you study music, there's still worlds upon worlds, and you look back at yourself and you're like, oh my God, I wasn't even like thinking of that. I wasn't even able to deal with that dimension of it because my brain was occupied fully with this. But the more that you do music, the more that's a little bit more automatic pilot, and now you have more room to think about this and more room to think about that. And that's when you hear those people that have been playing together. Even I don't know what this it's Rolling Stones, is that
that's John Mellencamp.
John Mellencamp. Yeah. I don't know anything about them, but that's one of the things I think we're missing from today is those bands that have been together for years and years, and you hear it. Because that, even being in the room together and then figuring out where they go with each other and knowing how to complement each other. So
that's why I brought up the Beatles Get Back documentary.
Yeah.
And why I think you should watch it, because you can see that they spent years playing live together.
Yeah.
They were writing songs in the studio. I mean, imagine buying studio time and you don't even have your songs written, but they were so sure of their process because they've spent 10 years listening to each other.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have 10 years to go play live show back to back to back every night, how do you teach people how to listen to one another? Like, where does somebody learn how to be in a band?
Exactly. And you don't as much anymore. And more so what you have is like one, that you have the talent, the lead guy or girl, and then you have such incredible musicians that they can do whatever you ask them to do on the spot for the most part. I mean, these guys are incredibly well trained. And so in that situation, actually, they're going to sound pretty darn good, right? Yeah. Because they have that experience that these are the best of the best guys in the room with each other, so they can get there pretty quick with each other. But it's still not the same, and it's part of one of the reasons why, like, I'm running into this right now because I'm in a position right now where I'm really working on selling my songs more, right? I'm on the business side of things a little bit more. Yeah. I've had a lot more time to, like, do a lot of songs, and I've been back into like, okay, well, I'm going to pitch it for this and pitch it for this and pitch it for this. And I keep getting the feedback that my stuff doesn't sound modern enough. But it's a quagmire for me because I don't like a lot of the modern stuff. And so that's like, I've been trying to be like, okay, I need to be more open-minded. But I do truly long for those days when, you know, even though some of those jazz guys, it wasn't perfect. It's almost like now the production and everything is almost too clean and too perfect. And it's formulaic, and it's, you know, we've talked about before, like some of the reasons why I'm not crazy about music, and I don't really like the message of a lot of it. But man, that music back in the 60s and 70s, it was so much more real and human. But at the same time, one of the things with music is that, like, it takes skill any direction you go with it. So playing out live like those guys did on the road, like, you know what I mean? It wasn't perfect. I mean, a lot of times you hear like all kinds of like issues with pitch or this or that, but it was gritty and it was real, and it was an energy and it was a skill to be able to be that authentic with their music and not be afraid of not sounding perfect. And like last week at my hairdresser, I was watching this J-Lo concert, and I mean, it was like these people, the lights and the dancing and the costumes, and I know she worked very hard for that. I know that there's skill involved with that level of orchestration, but it's not as interesting to me as like three guys getting together, and they've been playing together for years, and they're just up there playing music it's just not the same level. And that to me is music, right? That to me is real music. But how even you define what's entertainment, good music to you is a whole question.
Well, I think I sort of had that same sort of conversation with filmmakers and authors, because there's a version of that going on in every single medium where you've got the art house films versus the Hollywood films. Or, you know, I don't consider Hollywood filmmaking. I consider it media production.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's more and more, even if you have like if directors are hired because they have a specific voice, more and more the studios are kind of pushing down that voice. It's like with certain mandates. So even if you had, let's say you hired Quentin Tarantino to direct a Marvel movie, which will never happen. If it ever happens, I'm the first to go. Disney isn't going to do that unless they're sure they can dial down what we love about Tarantino films.
Right.
And the same thing with literature. Like a lot of the best stuff isn't being published by mainstream publishers, right? Yeah. They're not doing readings at Barnes and Noble because Barnes and Noble doesn't carry a lot of independent stuff. But that's all the best stuff. And with music too, like they're producing a show for Madison Square Garden from the moment they're writing those songs, right?
Right.
J-Lo isn't producing for, you know, an intimate pub.
Right.
Which is where a lot of people go when they love real music. They're going to go to a pub in Harlem or someplace like that where they can just sit down with the community and just listen to people riff.
Well, and that's what part of what I'm wanting to do is start like a campaign where it's like reclaim music. And it's like, it doesn't have to be like downing what's happening, because a lot of people like what's happening on those big scales. A lot of people love that stuff, right?
You kind of need both.
That's my point. Like, but it doesn't have to be which is what's happened. It has been to the exclusion of the local scene, and in people even having an appreciation for that local scene. And, reclaiming music to me is this idea that we all are musicians. We all have a voice, and like music, it plays an important role, whether it's at the J-Lo stage of like all these people amassing together. And I'm sure for those people, it's a very joyous event, But then on another level of like in the churches singing together, or, like drunk people in Irish bars, like singing at night together. I mean, just this idea of music being like not so narrowly defined as what's good music and what's bad music, and also people sort of being shepherded into what their tastes are and not even realizing that, and losing touch with the roots of, I just wonder now if there's even really that many people who know to appreciate local music. I can't remember if I told this story here on the podcast last time, but I played for a girl one time who had never, she was like 18, 19, had never seen live music. Never once. And if you're not exposed to things often as a child, or sort of in our school systems, you might not even have a category for that, And this blows my mind, Eric, but I meet more and more young people, and by young I mean like in their 20s, that don't even watch movies. We'll be like, oh, have you seen this movie? Or are you guys seeing Top Gun or whatever? And they'll be like, we don't really watch movies. And it's like, that's the kind of world we're in. It's like this, it's media. It's like pure media driven. And, even the music industry is being driven by these TikTok trends now, and like the way that it's going. And part of me just wants to throw my hands up in the air and just be like, I'm done. Like, I just want to like go and play my piano and some little local nook and cranny somewhere. I'll always do music, I'll always keep doing it. And then another part of me is like, no, like, why don't you, this is what I'm sort of forcing myself to do. Why don't you actually see what these trends are? Why don't you actually understand what they're currently thinking about all of this? Because it doesn't make sense to me. Going back to the No Sense song from Fractals, Eric Anderson's song, No Sense. Like, it doesn't make sense to me that this is art. Like, it just doesn't connect with me on any level anymore. And I don't know how to explain that, but it's like, it just isn't there for me the way that, like, I think that's part of the reason I was into a lot of jazz musicians in the early 2000s, because there's still this element of just musicians playing. But I don't even know where those guys are at this point, to be honest with you. I've lost touch with all of it, and a big part of it is the last few years just not getting out and hearing as much live music, And so I've lost touch with it too, and it just makes me wonder, is it even in our culture anymore to go and hear music at the pub?
Yeah, I don't know. I do know that, like, you touch upon something interesting about the people who don't watch films. Is I've encountered that where somebody doesn't grow up with a television, and the parents simultaneously also don't take them to the cinema, so they don't grow up with sort of the ability to actually understand the medium. I guess it's almost like a literacy.
Mm-hmm. For movies.
Yeah, for movies, but you're describing the same thing happening with music, is people just don't have the literacy to understand jazz, for example, or the purpose of it. Yeah. And I remember like showing Death and Life to some people back home, and one of the people was the kid who never grew up with a TV. The only times he ever watched anything was at school. Sometimes they would show us films, right? But he never went to the movies, and he did see Death and Life, and he was like, I actually understand this, because there's so much voiceover, and we're only allowed to listen to the radio. And that's the only reason Death and Life was accessible to him, is it played like a radio show.
Oh, interesting.
So if you like close your eyes and you listen to our film, like, it's just, I guess that's the only reason it was accessible.
Well, and I think too, they're like having more of an open mind about art, and what art is, because I think there's a lot of, if you've seen so many movies, then there's expectations, and maybe that's what it is. There's a lot of expectations of what, is a movie supposed to be, or what, right. And I understand those expectations, and this is what I'm facing even with, sync licensing and these things, is that they expect the production to sound a certain way. And so if you're just creating good music because it's just how you think, but it's not sort of ticking off these certain boxes with these certain samples or this certain sound or these certain trends, then you're not even in the door. It's once again like sort of those expectations can sort of be gatekeepers for people's ability to open their heart and their mind to a piece of art. And I think we've been taught that. And I think there's also this idea of like what's professional and what's this, and we all have these sort of ideas in our head, these expectations. And this kind of goes back to this concept, another concept that I'm sort of working on. I'm thinking about doing like several different sort of concept pieces, writing and some videos about these concepts of, number one, reclaiming music and making it, more like back to the people. Like really, what are the people? Because it feels like a lot of the music has certain messages and it's all going a certain way. And to be honest with you, I don't really know who wanted any of those messages, but it doesn't really reflect the mass variety of people and cultures out there. And the second thing I want to talk about is overlays, and this idea that we all have these beliefs and these preconceived notions, and that it's like wallpaper in our minds, and that we don't realize we're looking through everything through those filters. And some of those filters have been taught to us, a lot of them have been taught to us through our media, through the music and the films and the information that we're allowing in. And we don't realize that we're really being limited by that stuff. We can't get outside of our own filters to recognize the world at large. And, when you do that, it's humbling because it's like, what? Like movies is only one small art form, and maybe it is only going to get to certain people who have been sort of conditioned. But hey, that's great. You have an art form and you have people you share, but that's not the end all be all of art forms. I mean, there's so many other cultures that do things, like the Mongolian chanters that can do, what the Mongolian chanters can do when they sing?
They chant? Sorry.
It's okay.
I don't know, I guess.
So the human voice is only designed to be able to sing one note at a time, but we have overtones, right? And the Mongolian chanters are from part of their culture. They can bring those overtones so strongly that it sounds like they're singing two notes. And people have learned how to do it from it, but that's just part of their culture. That's just part of who they are. And I'm more interested in that these days of like, being able to explore like how humans are expressing themselves and expanding the definition of what art is, and the idea of like, as a human being, isn't each one of us maybe have something to share or express in that arena, and that's their art, and it can look different for a lot of people, and some people are going to really like resonate with it, and some people it's only going to be for that person, but it's all valuable. It's all valuable, and it doesn't have to be commoditized or come down to, let me just say this. I think that Americans in particular think that good art is valued then. Like if it's good art, then a lot of people are following it, or a lot of money is being made off of it. And I'm just saying that's an expectation or a filter, and I would even say it's a myth. I would even say it's not that.
Yeah, it's sort of this idea that, well, if it's free, then there's no value to it. Yeah. That's sort of the mentality that so many people seem to have. And it's like, well, if it's worth my time, then you'll charge for it or something like that. But have you ever, I don't remember where I read this, but you may have come across it at some point, where it's this theory that all art gravitates towards, no matter where a production process starts, whether it's purely creative and artistic, everything evolves to just be the same thing, produced the same way, no matter what the medium is. And it doesn't even have to apply to art. It could apply to the construction of goods, construction of buildings. Wherever it starts as a process, everything always evolves to sort of being produced the same way into being the exact same. So all the films in Hollywood, for example, a lot of them started out just kind of experimenting and learning how to make films. But eventually, over decades, everything sort of comes together as a formula, so to speak, an industrialized formula. And I feel like that's the case with every single industry.
But see, I definitely think that that's true. I would say of the stuff that really gets pushed, because you can even look, we're living in interesting times and people are researching so much stuff, and sometimes it's hard to tell what's real and what's not with that research, but you do wonder about all of it. How does it all end up in the same place, and how does it all kind of go back to the same sort of messages, the same agendas, the same ideas? Is that just, I guess Eric Weinstein, like he talks about like how that happens in academia, that people sort of censor themselves, but not because there's any conspiracy, but just because they want to be
accepted.
They want to be accepted, they want to get tenure. They're all going for the same goals, so they end up making choices that will get them there. And in the end, those choices end up having us all do the
same thing. Yeah.
So is it just human nature, or is it more something about our particular time period and the commoditization and the sort of economic system that we're in?
Yeah, I actually have experience trying to get into academia. When I was in my MFA, I was trying to get teaching gigs, and it was like you could tell who was going to get those gigs and who wasn't, but based on whether they fit a formula.
Right.
If they were a type of person who was saying the right things. And it didn't matter how much you knew or how well you could convey concepts.
Well, I saw that for sure in the music industry. It didn't matter how talented you were. Were you the right personality, et cetera, to sort of fit that mold, because it's a business at the end of the day, and it takes a certain type of person to want to deal with a lot of that stuff. And maybe it was one of those things where you kind of feel like a fool, because I did used to think, the really talented people rise to the top. That's what happens, right? If you're just really talented, then nothing's going to hold you back and you're just going to rise to the top. And then you start to realize, like, no, that's like actually a myth. That's like a childhood myth of whatever. And maybe in the 70s and 60s, it was a little bit more possible for it to be grassroots, for somebody to sort of rise up the ranks. And you could say that would be true right now on the internet and people being able to get a following that way. But it's not just good music that gets a following on the internet. It's like a certain savvy.
Yeah.
With gaining attention that way. You know what I mean? So I would say there's a lot of very, very talented musicians out there in the world that we will never hear.
I found that like that saying, the cream rises to the top, is only said by either people who never tried and don't really understand what it takes,
right.
But then also the people who have made it to the top will always say that. Like Seinfeld says it all the time. I'm like, you're such a fucking liar, dude. You're only saying it because you made it.
Yeah. It's easy to do that, but then, a lot of people will go back and look at connections. Yeah. And a lot of people will say it's more so who you know. God.
I don't even get me started on like how fucking related to everybody, all the success, like all these successful people. Everybody's related to someone.
I know.
It's so weird.
I know, it's weird. And that could be human nature too. Like you just end up helping the people that you know, and you know what I mean? Yeah. But the part that people don't realize is it really does feel pretty closed to anybody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It really does feel pretty closed. And that's the part that I think it makes us, they say we're in food deserts, because a lot of the food has been, same thing, processed the same way, and it takes a lot of the nutrition out of it, and we're eating a lot of like crap. And back in the day when our grandparents had gardens, and people were eating a lot more different things. We weren't all eating the same exact sources of stuff.
Yeah.
And you could almost say the same thing's happening with our art too. And I would say that that's a sign of an unhealthy culture, because I think the biggest purpose of art, in my opinion, is reflection for healing. So if you're only being reflected a certain image, and other voices and other things are not really being allowed to have any say or any equal ground or get any exposure, then you're probably got some pretty big blind spots as a society.
I mean, that's sort of why, like, so this is all why I advocate for, like, people who want to make films should make films in their community for their communities. That's one of the episodes that I had recently.
Oh, yeah? Oh, I saw that one. Yeah.
Where I'd made a film like 20 years ago, and I screened it 20 years ago, and like the whole town participated not only in the making of the film, but they all came to the screening, and it was an event that brought people together. 20 years later, I restore the film, we screen it again, and it brings in even more people.
You're kidding.
And it's just like...
It's cool.
And then we got to have a Q&A about, like, this is what people should be doing in these places, because it brings these communities alive, you know, and it's nice to have an Avengers once in a while, but that's not culture. Real culture is this sort of thing where people come together and they create and they interact with one another. That's culture.
Yeah.
Avengers is commerce, and there's a big difference.
That's true. Oh, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And you know, that I think sometimes I regret coming to New York, you know?
Me too.
Because it's like, why didn't I just stay right there in my local community and just create out there? And I think I did have a little bit of an idea of, like, that wasn't enough somehow, you know? And it took me coming and investigating and seeing behind the curtain of Oz to realize, like, this isn't culture either. Like, this isn't any more. I mean, it really kind of goes to this idea of, like, one versus a million. Like, this might be getting a little bit too deep, but, you know, I'm, like, into metaphysics, and on a certain level, like, when you connect with another human being, like, that's the ultimate goal to me of art, is just being able to communicate and connect. And in reality, it's our own brains that think it's 1,000 people is better than 100 people, or, you know, but that's even another construct, you know. It's kind of where competition comes from too. And I think that those things aren't even in the real reality of things, and the bigger reality where we're all connected. Those things don't matter. You know what I mean? So somebody in his community making art that really is a true authentic voice and truly touching people on a deeper level. And for me, it's also, can it even heal? Can it even heal traumas? Can it heal perspectives? Can it help that person to be more of who they're meant to be? If you're doing that for one person, then why would it, you know, why is that, you know, not valued or not seen for something as like a hero of the community, or somebody of upstanding, I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter what people think anyways, but it's like sometimes you know, you just kind of get tired of watching people who are entertaining, but they're not necessarily even like good people, and they're being treated like heroes, and they're almost worshipped in our society. God, yeah. And then you have people right there in your own community who have just good, hardworking people who are almost like treated like, well, what a loser, because they're not rich, or I don't know why they're treated that way.
That sort of seems to be, though, like a constant across all of society, right? So you have somebody like a politician, or maybe even like the chief of police, who are making enormous sums of money a year. But then you got an EMT who's working their ass off to save lives, who make nothing.
Yeah.
Like they're barely making ends meet in our society, in any town in America. EMTs are paid the worst of all the public servants.
Really? I didn't know that.
And honestly, like, next to firefighters, they should be paid the most. And it's just like, we see it everywhere.
It's everywhere. I mean, don't even get me started about teachers.
Oh, I was about to say teachers. Because my sister's a school teacher.
Yeah, I mean, and I watch that from myself, like what teachers deal with and what they're paid, and then worse even is just that then the community doesn't even really respect them.
Yeah, I have some theories about that. With like a lot of people having gone to bad public schools and hated their teachers, it carries over into an adulthood where they're automatically going to hate the teachers that are teaching their kids.
Yeah.
Like, I just feel like
well, they should spend like 2 months in one of these public schools, because if they actually saw what some of these teachers are dealing with, I mean, it's insane. But and everybody, you know, we're at that place in society where it's like that. Like, people are just really being pushed to their limit, without really feeling appreciated and compensated. And it's not just artists anymore. It used to be that music, but the people always said musicians were the canary in the coal mine. And when you devalue musicians and you devalue, it's sort of a sign for where the whole society's going. And now I feel like a lot of people, a lot of different industries, a lot of people just have that feeling. And I don't know, this is where art would come in. Like we need to be reflecting that, we need to be reflecting back this feeling that, people don't feel valued in general. I don't think I'm the only one. And what can you do about that? I mean, really, you have to start with just valuing yourself and then having people in your life right around you. You have to get back to the basics of your own family and your own community, because society at large seems to be going a whole different direction with who's being valued. And, it's kind of feels fake. It feels like an arbitrary, I think we're all sort of feeling like it's an arbitrary system how the economic system decides who makes a lot of money and who doesn't.
Yeah, it is arbitrary. I would agree with that.
But I mean, we're getting way out.
How do you? So what? Amidst this sort of overwhelming feeling, how do you stay focused on just you still push forward with things, right? Now you're focused on the business aspects of your enterprise and how you're going to get your music out there. There's got to be some belief, some sort of optimism going on that makes all this effort worth it.
Well, I think that for me, I think I have optimism in the idea that when humans get put under extreme pressure, then that's when they make quantum leaps. And I think for myself, I feel that way too, that I'm really letting go of a lot of my overlays, a lot of my assumptions, a lot of the things that have been running me. I'm trying to get clear of all that, and simultaneously while I get clear on it, then go back and go ahead and look at the systems of the world, or look at where we're at from a fresh perspective. And the optimism I think that I have is also starting to realize that whatever this is, whatever this game is, there's real love there. Love is the thing that for me is interesting, and for me is the thing that should be promoted, and for me is the thing that I want to share with people. And I love music and I love art, and creativity is the process right now for me to sort of heal, to get past my own fears, and to be humbled in a lot. I've been humbled in a lot of ways, to just recognize I don't want to keep going the way I was going. And right now, while everything feels like there's so much pressure from so many different directions, and society is sort of in such an unusual place, at least for my lifetime, I do think that if you can keep your sanity and not get bogged down under the fear or the despair, then you can find windows that you didn't even know were there. You couldn't even see them before because of your own life track you were on. So I guess in a way I could see it as, I'm optimistic that now is a chance maybe where I can jump tracks or jump timelines, as some people would say, to a place that it might not be that I'm successful in the music industry at all. It might not be that my songs ever sell, but I'm going to keep creating them, because one thing that I have been successful is to be able to get to a point where I can create music that truly does express what I want, and to be in a place where I'm almost looking at the idea of, well, okay, right now I'm producing a video a week on YouTube, and that's been a big commitment for a year.
Well, that is a commitment.
And I've missed a couple weeks here and there, and sometimes I'll be honest with you, the videos are thrown together. Other times I spend a lot more time on it. It's been varied, right? But that's shown me that I still even have so many songs I want to. I mean, I still have a backlog of songs, right? I just have so many songs that want to come through. So I'm optimistic, can I actually get to a place where I literally am having the songs come through more in real time and get them produced and get them out there? And it's not, when I say get them out there, it's more so for me than anybody. But if it's beneficial to anybody, or to me, it's me putting my little mirror up from my corner of the world of what's going on with me and what's going on with my interaction with the world. And if that's helpful to anybody, great. But it doesn't matter, and I don't have to be as bogged down anymore with these expectations of, or haunted by expectations. So I'm optimistic about that. But as far as me being optimistic about like being able to really get into the music industry, I can't say I'm optimistic about that, but I can say that a part of me wants to have a better technical understanding of the whole thing, and a better sort of, the creative space is very easy for me. The logical business side, doing my P's and Q's, that's been harder. And for some reason, I feel more motivated to do that. I don't know exactly why that's the case. But something in me is kind of like, now's the time.
Yeah. Well, I feel like if you can figure out how to make the business side work, you'll essentially be the industry. That's really it. Everybody who's in the industry is the industry because they figured out the business side.
But see, that's my question, though, is like, can you do that? And I let me ask you this question.
Okay. I'll tell you how I feel.
Let's say that knowing the business side to me doesn't necessarily mean I'm in the business, because it just means that at least like I'm not.
No, I'm not saying knowing.
Yeah.
I'm saying mastering it.
Okay.
Having it be successful for you.
But even that, I'm still going to parse that out a little bit. Okay. Because I can understand, or I can master like what the processes are, who to get it to, and still not create music that they want to buy, versus going all the way to the level of like understanding like they want this and they want this and they want it produced this way. And so to me, is that what it takes to actually get in there? And if that's the case, like you still...
But who are they? Because I feel like the answer is going to be very specific. Like, if you want to license music to the film industry, that's going to be more specific for the most part. So you could specialize in what they want without sacrificing your integrity. But at the same time, you could also, I don't know, I license your music, so to speak.
Yeah.
Sort of. It honestly, like, I think it really depends too. Like, what's an interesting thing is when I made the trailer for Fractals, and I initially cut it to regular Hollywood music. It was music from a movie called The Island. And
with Leonardo DiCaprio?
No.
Okay.
Maybe it's not called The Island. I don't remember what it's called. It didn't have DiCaprio in it, though.
Okay. No.
But, like, it was, as a standalone piece of music, it really works. In that film, it worked. But that made the trailer look really unprofessional. But then I had these stems that you sent me as, like, tests. Like, hey, is this good or whatever?
Yeah.
And I just synced those to the trailer, and I'm like, this works perfect. I don't even need to re-edit the trailer. Like, it's just done. And that's how I got the trailer.
Yeah.
And so there is a place for what you are naturally gravitating towards doing, but you have to find the people where that work coincides.
We'll see, okay.
At the same time, though, you know the rules of music, so to speak, in terms of what they're looking for. Like, movie scoring in Hollywood is, if you like break down every movie score in Hollywood to just the piano riff, it's so stupidly simple. And it's just like, if that's what they want too, like, I know people who do play jazz. John Williams, oh my God, John Williams, the guy who did Jurassic Park and Jaws, biggest movie composer in the world. Started out as a jazz musician and still considers himself a jazz musician. He just like puts all these things together like it's nothing, and then he moves on and does the stuff that he loves. Yeah. So it's really just
gotcha.
Yeah, negotiating the business is really just accepting that sometimes the filmmakers aren't gonna be like me, where your work that you're doing naturally will just automatically work.
Well, but that's what I like working with you. That's what I'm wondering. Can I find those opportunities? You know what I mean? Right. Can I just find that audience and those people and just make a nice little career that way, which in some ways is what I've been doing? Or, do I spend a little bit more time and I learn a little bit more. And in reality, it's not, I understand the music side, and I wanted to study that. I wanted to. The part that I'm sort of realizing now is it's the production. It's equally the production. It's equally that allows the doors to be open or not. Like whether they'll listen to 3 seconds based on the production quality.
Yeah.
And it's not just production quality, because I've gotten some really great things produced. So that's when I'm realizing it's a certain sound, it's certain trends, and when I say it is actually an industry. It's the industry that I'm talking about. Whether it's music movies or TV or some of those bigger opportunities, you'd be surprised with actually how small it is, to get to those opportunities. And so that's the question, is that something that I'm willing to do? And once again, it kind of comes down to money too, because you can just pay some of these producers, but then you have to really invest in your music up front, And so it just really comes down to a business side. And I guess the answer to it is really like, what is it that the artist is willing to do without losing the joy of their craft?
Yeah,
right.
I think it's going to be a juggling act, to be honest.
And it's different for every artist, and it's different for every artist in their seasons, because I haven't been willing to go to this length before. But in large part, I think it was because I was out playing all the time, and that was taking up so much of my, bandwidth. And now that I'm not playing out, I'm really just doing private events at this point for the most part. Just being real selective with the gigs I do. And it's left a lot of time for composing. And so I've finally been able to almost get to that point, like I'm saying, that I'm composing and doing rough demos of the music I really like. How do you take those songs then and get it to that next level?
Well, ideally, what do you want done in terms of production that you can't already do?
That, Eric, is the exact question I'm even trying to solve right now. Because you don't know what you don't know, right? And to me, I'm like, feedback I'm getting for it, it's like, it doesn't make sense. It's like if I'm saying like, hey, Eric, sit up straight, and then you sit up straight, and you're like, no, sit up straight, and it's like you sit up straight, it's like, no, Eric, sit up straight. It's like, that's all the conversations have been.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like you would benefit though from just networking with producers who maybe are interacting in different circles and in different ways. So there's a lot of producers on YouTube, for example, who own studios. There's this one guy who's like, he's the biggest music YouTuber. He has a studio out of like Atlanta. And I would be curious to what he would have to say in this conversation. Because there are guys out there, and obviously I'm using guys as a plural, but they're out there, and I'm wondering if it makes sense to see if you can pick their brains. Hey, would you be willing to have a conversation with me for my YouTube video? Then they'll totally meet with you if it's for YouTube.
Oh, well, that's interesting, but it's like I actually had a conversation with a producer last week.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and it kind of came down to the same thing, but one of the questions that he asked me is, he said, how do you think you can make modern music if you're not listening to modern music?
But why do you have to make modern music? So that's a fallacy, first of all. Because everybody who's ever like really paved the way and blown up and gone down in history as like legendary composers weren't making the music of that day.
Well, but see, so that's the quagmire you're in, though. Do you see what I'm saying? Because these guys will listen to 3 seconds of it and be like, well, it's not modern sounding. And so it's like, do you see this quagmire that you're in? It's like, to make modern music, you have to, in a way, be conforming to the trends that are already happening. And then if not, then, how do you even get these guys to give it a listen or give it a go? And their tastes are that direction, and to them, it is good music. To them, it is the right thing. To them,
anything that is an immediate payday is good music. But I don't know if they have an ear for music, really. They just have an ear for what sells. That's a completely different thing. And we have the same thing in literature, too, where, I could spend years toiling at a novel. They read the first 3 sentences and decide it's not for them.
Exactly.
And it happens in film too.
And it's because of these little things that you're not even aware of. right? These little things, because they are
I'm aware
spending.
of them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I know that my production value is lower than a lot of the films that I'm competing against. I know that the language I use in my paragraphs is a little rough for the mainstream market, but at the same time, like, I don't want to burn all my neurons writing something that I would never read, or making a film that I don't really want to watch, because I did that already. I made a sort of a mainstream film. It was my only union film I ever directed. I just, I lost the film. It doesn't exist. And I'm glad it doesn't exist, because it just wasn't an Eric Norcross film. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't what I had planned to do.
Gotcha.
And it was very much like, by the Hollywood formula.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't work. And I feel like the people who are producing really great pop, because I do listen to Top 40.
Do you?
Yeah. They're the ones who love it.
Yeah.
And they get it. And if you don't love it, then why?
That's the
Why
problem.
produce it? I'm not going to produce like a Transformers movie. I don't love them that much.
Well, and so then that's the secondary option, and it still comes down to business. But the secondary option is you don't try to make it through those gatekeepers. You don't try to conform your sound or your movie in any way, shape, or form, right? Instead, you just continue to do the work that you feel called to do as best you can do it, and you look for an audience that appreciates that. You look for the people or the audience that appreciates that. And if they don't come, if it never ends up being what never ends up being that you can completely quit your full-time job or whatever, it becomes your career, right? If it never does that, can you go full steam ahead anyways without that expectation?
Because you're making it about what your life is about. So for me as a filmmaker, or as an every medium person at this point, but like, I always focus on film because that was always about the industry initially. I always just make it like, the next film I do, if I'm putting all my resources and myself into it, it has to be something I really want to see. I don't want to put all of that effort into something that I don't want to see.
Yeah.
And that's really it. And it also, like, it has to be a learning opportunity.
Right.
Like right now I'm developing a monster movie. I'm developing a monster movie because I'd never made one and I want to learn how to make one. But at the same time, it's very much me, where I'm exploring philosophically what is a monster to different people in society. And so I'm learning how to design a multitude of different monsters for this movie. And I know it'll take me years to do, because I am operating on an out-of-pocket budget, but at the same time, like, I know how to make a monster movie like Friday the 13th or whatever. But why? I don't watch those movies. I don't care about those movies.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense for me to. I love the feeling I get when I get like a review, right? Where I don't get a lot of reviews. I don't really submit my stuff to reviews. But Death and Life and Fractals were both reviewed by the same person, back to back. And in both of those reviews, he called me a teacher. He says, I watch these films and I feel like I'm learning something that I never thought I would be interested in learning. And he couldn't grasp what it was.
Yeah.
But I love that.
Yeah.
And that is good enough for me. Yeah. I think from an industry standpoint, okay, so I always just wanted to be able to operate like a small business. I'm like the general store of filmmakers. Whereas everybody else would be like Walmart. Everybody wants to be Walmart. I just want to be the general store.
Yeah.
And if I could figure that out, like, that would be ideal.
That's what I'm working on too, because it's like, I remember when I realized I wanted to do music, it almost felt like a death sentence, because I was like, I really love this, I really want to do it, but it was the last thing I wanted to do. And one of the thoughts I had is like, why can't it just be like, you could be almost like a nurse, like maybe make, at the time I think it was like 40,000 a year. Like know that you could be a musician and just make 40,000 a year and just do what you loved and that's it. Like at the time I just was like, why can't it be that way? And in reality, it used to be a little bit more like that. You used to have these songwriter places in Nashville in the 60s and 70s where you could just kind of get like a decent salary and just songwrite and you didn't have to be famous. You didn't have to be out peddling your stuff. You just do music.
Or even if you're like, just like, I think you alluded to them earlier, if you're just like a session musician who knows all your shit.
Yeah.
And you just brought in for a gig every day.
But I'll tell you, like, and I could be wrong about this, okay? And some other musicians could come in and, you know, even those guys aren't being paid what they should be. I mean, unless you're at the Uber level. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, the whole industry was deflated from the point I got into it. And, I mean, in the 80s, I think you could make a decent living as a local band, you know? And wedding bands are a different story because those guys are making a fair amount of money. But then again, like, wedding bands is a whole thing. And the DJs have kind of captured that market for the most part. So it's much more competitive now. And it's still kind of, now it's being run by more like conglomerates, you know, instead of independent bands. So I dream of the same thing, but one of the things I'm struggling with right now is, can I really be okay just, to me, like, if you can set out to just do music your way and really be okay with whether or not it ever gets to that place or not that you're able to feed your family from it, then to me it's a little bit like, I guess my point is, what I'm trying to say is, like, I think there is a little bit of a narcissist in me and a little bit of a narcissist in the industry, and that's the part that I think is finally stripping away from me. And even though it wasn't really on the forefront and I wasn't trying to make decisions based on that, part of you does almost get embarrassed if you're not, you know, like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, you get sucked into that. I get what you're saying.
You
want to be special.
It's sort of like that song that we did a music video recently, where you sang about what you think other people expect you to be, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what you're alluding to.
I am. It's like, I feel like that still was in the background, and now I'm really starting to the true test of it now, to really let go of that, is like, I don't need to be special. I just need to be who I am.
Yeah.
And
but I also
can I create art from that place? Because I do feel like a lot of artists and a lot of musicians are caught up in their own level of, like, wanting to be special, or you have to have it a little bit, right? To have the cojones to get up there.
Yeah, of course.
So how do you, but I've always said that I think we need more art, and this goes back to reclaiming, that's not coming from that place. It's not about me. It's about something bigger than me.
There's one guy I hold up as a great example of, he's got his practice down. He's a practicing artist who does gallery showings.
Yeah.
But he also teaches art, and he mentors people in academia. I feel like this dude has the perfect life.
Yeah.
And if we could find a version of that for each of ourselves,
right,
that would be ideal. Because really, it's just about art practice. I just want to learn how to make certain types of movies by making them.
Yeah.
So what do I have to do to keep doing that? You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why I'm optimistic, because, you know, I feel like I'm shedding a lot of stuff that was holding me back or getting me caught up in traps, and it's been good. And instead, I'm really back to where I've always been. I've always been here, but it's just sometimes you still just got to keep coming back to yourself, right? Just new seasons, new times. Keep coming back to yourself and say, okay. And I feel really thankful that I've been able to have the career that I've had, because the main thing for me was getting to spend my days doing music. That was the main thing I wanted.
Do you do music festivals?
I've only done a few. But I mean, that's the business side of it that's always been hard for me. Is people don't understand, like, if you're just trying to, like, get good at your craft, and you're teaching and you're paying your bills and you're playing out, then I've never been able to get to that next place where I'm also then promoting to festivals and getting in there and getting, you know, I've never been able, and a lot of people have this kind of story, but right before coronavirus, I was like right on the cusp of some of that stuff, and then it all just dropped out. But when it dropped out, I realized there was a part of me that felt like am I being driven by no longer my own authenticity? Like, am I just being driven by something else? And it was good. You know what I mean? It was good to come back to a place of like, where is it really that I want to go? Because I'll tell you, like, being an independent artist, and there's a lot of us doing it, you have to do everything. And that's not the way that artists normally function. I mean, in a healthier society, artists do the creativity and then they have people helping them with the rest.
Yeah.
But now you have to get to a certain level of success to have that. And then at that point, you lose a lot of control. So it's kind of like,
well,
one or
that's
the
something
other.
I've been thinking about, is because I do eventually want people to help me. At the same time, I can't stand the freelance crew community because I just don't get along with film crews.
Really?
Yeah, I don't get along with it, like anybody who works in the industry. And so one of the things I've been brainstorming is, how do I build myself a sort of network of people who understand what I'm trying to do and can support it.
Right.
That's one of the things with that film that I mentioned before that didn't work out, is everybody had a formula about how they wanted to do everything. And you've seen my process today. I'm very nuts.
Yeah.
My equipment's all over the place, but it's just part of it. It has to be.
Yeah.
And it drove them insane.
Yeah.
And we just didn't get along. And, you know, I get that there's a quote unquote tried and true way of doing things in any industry, but at the same time, the tried and true way doesn't make me want to produce anything.
Yeah. Well, and that's, you know, that goes back to that question too, because then it's like, you know, there's a part of me that looks back on a lot of stuff and thought like, well, you know, I could have gotten along better, you know what I mean, with people, or I could have like tried to be more of a team player, like but I mean, this is where it's just like, I think I always thought too that, and I still do, that if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And a lot of those situations and stuff, there was reasons why, even deeper than just like, okay, the work ethic isn't exactly the same. It's just like fun, like going back to the overlays, like fundamental differences in how we're viewing the world and viewing art.
Yeah.
And those, it's like some things I'm willing to compromise on as far as just like working on things. And it's always an internal thing for me, like, because I love doing this work. So something in me wants to do it, right? And when I just have these like do not want to do it, or in some ways I've had like just almost like opposite miracles where like boulders fall or in the middle of the road and I can't get there. You know, I have obstacles come up.
Yeah.
And I can go back and question all of that, and you know, but I'm just that, I think in some ways the good and the bad of really being able to hold on to a unique voice is that in some ways like people aren't going to get it, and in some ways they're going to be even offended by it, even if you're not even trying to offend them, because somehow it calls into question things that they don't want to question. And that's why I've always enjoyed working with you, because I can tell, and I tend to have a lot of people like this in my life, like they're just out of the box people, right? You're just out of the box. And if you're an out of box person, then getting along with other people can be a bit of something you have to try to work with, right? Because you don't understand. I know you were saying before, like you don't, like you said that it wasn't that you don't know what the trends are, like when you're writing, but you just, you know, do them anyways because it's what you feel like is the right thing for you to do. But sometimes in my case, I really don't even know. It's like I'm not in the box, and they're all operating on these rules of the box, and I literally don't know what those rules are.
Well, you know, this is sort of like what's been happening this week as we're recording it is one of our collaborators from Fractals came over from the United Kingdom to visit, and he wanted me to take some time with him this week to teach him how I make movies. Because there's the film school way of making movies, which is like the way anybody's really taught, whether you're doing it through a film school or tutorials on YouTube. And then there's the way I do things, which is very loosey-goosey. You've experienced it with the music video. And there's somewhat of an idea, but there's not really a production plan. I go in with a camera and we just improvise. And so yesterday we were walking around the city. He's like, all right, so how are we going to do that? I'm like, you're just going to stand there and I'm going to film you. He's like, but what are we filming? I don't get it. And I had to explain to him, like, all right, if you've already explained to me that your character is supposed to be a Wall Street guy. So we're going to put these windows behind you. These windows, and I explained to him, we just ended up downtown because that's the easiest place in Manhattan for me to access. I'm like, these windows are the windows of the World Financial Center. So anybody in New York is going to automatically understand that you're a guy who works downtown. It's a very specific type of window. And we film it and we go on, and he's very skeptical. We ended up filming him going down an escalator into the PATH train. He's like, why are you filming that? Just trust me. Then we go down to Wall Street. He's like, okay, I get this. I'm like, yeah, but we're not going to film this angle. We're actually not going to film the stock exchange at all. And I filmed him walking on the cobblestones instead, and it was close-ups of the cobblestone. And then we go on, and we make our way to Soho, and eventually, end of the day, we both go our separate ways, and I sent him the footage. And he's reviewing footage from his camera, because we were shooting on like a multitude of cameras, just experimenting. And he's like, you put a story together. Like, I see the story you put together of this guy. And basically the story that we found was him walking out of the stock exchange. And you could tell it was a stock exchange area, even though you couldn't see the stock exchange. And being fed up with the financial sector and quitting and just walking around the city soul searching. And that was the story we came up with. With just this idea of a guy who works in finance walking around the city. And it's just like, but you hire a professional DP to try and shoot that. Yeah. There would be a no tolerance policy on that sort of just wandering around and invent it as you go.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of like the improv. It goes back to improv. And one of the biggest things that brought me to music was that ability, because I think it gets, to me, it's like tapping into this human potential, like this idea of like, you know, where coal gets crushed and then made into diamonds, right? It's like the pressure creates something beautiful. And that's what I'm interested in, is like human beings, like in their potential. And for me, improvisation is one of those things where it's like, what are you connecting to when you don't know what's going on and you allow yourself to just sort of be a little bit lost and a little bit led, and then all of a sudden everything works out in this way where it feels like it's a divine plan, but you didn't create it. It came from something beyond you. What is that? You know, that to me is real creativity. That to me is like what humans have that's so amazing. And computers are great. They do a lot of analytics, but they don't have that. What is that? And I think there's a lot of different ways to explain it, and I don't want to turn anybody off because a lot of times people have their certain ways they want to explain this, but to me it's about getting in tune with spirit, getting in tune with this metaphysical place where we're all united, and this world is maybe even like a simulation or an illusion or something, and we're all connected beyond it, and it's like this, you know, higher self or our soul or whatever it is, and it's an intelligence that somehow can transcend time and space. And that to me is what's so exciting about creativity, true creativity, and truly creating from that place. And I will tell you that when you get professional and you get higher up, a lot of that becomes much harder to do.
Well, it's designed to disconnect you from your, I don't want to use the word consciousness wrong, but I do feel like there's a consciousness aspect to this process that I'm describing, because I'm going in there with no plan and coming out with something each time. I mean, that music video is a great example. The one that we just did, you haven't released it at the time of this recording, but it's coming soon.
Coming soon.
Or it might be out. I don't know when this is being released. But
it turned out we couldn't have planned.
Yeah, I'm just like, we're going to go downtown, we're going to shoot. And then, like, as soon as I get the next prop in, we'll shoot somewhere else, and it'll be drastically different. I don't know what it's going to be. But then, like, as I was editing, I'm like, oh, well, your song is about, you know, creativity and doing what you need to do versus what everybody expects you to do, or something like that. And I'm like, oh, that's so downtown's one character. That's the one everybody expects you to be. And then being out in nature and just jamming, that's who you're supposed to be, and not who everybody thinks you're supposed to be. Yeah. And so then suddenly that informs the edit. No storyboards, no plan, no script, no nothing. And I just thought it turned out like anything I've been doing the past few years. It just worked. Yeah.
But see, you have that, and that's like the jazz musicians. I mean, they do that too. I've always been amazed at the jazz musicians' ability to sort of tap into parts of our brain that I think a lot of us don't. It's there for all of us, but we don't tap into it. Yeah. And it's beyond time. it takes a certain level of faith and trust, which means you can't be afraid.
Can't be afraid to
Because the minute you get afraid of any fear at all will close this down.
Yeah.
You have to be completely trusting. Now, it doesn't matter what you're trusting, but it's this, and that comes down maybe to the personal part of each person, but it's that ability to be open.
Yeah.
And to allow things and to not try to control it all. And that's why, to me, art is so important, and why it's important for every person to be doing art from that place, to learn that for themselves, because then other people will say, like, our lives are artwork, right? We're creating our lives.
Right.
And so how much better would our lives be if we weren't making decisions out of fear, but rather
I always say, like, don't be afraid to get weird.
Yeah, well, that's...
Don't be afraid to get weird. The weirder, the funner. And then, the thing is, it helps loosen up that ability to break people out of sort of that fear. Because, in fractals, I was very fearful of what are we going to do about the angel and all those special effects and the black hole. Oh, I'll just get weird about it. The black hole will just be like canvas dipped in black. The angel will be a fucking mannequin. Like, you make it as weird as possible, and suddenly it's not scary anymore. It's just
That's
awesome
cool.
and fun. And I think that can be applicable to pretty much any medium.
Well, I like that. That's good advice. And I think that I've always been able to see that there's a method to your madness. And so, it doesn't, but there has been times even for me that I've told you in our process, I can feel my fears coming up. And this is maybe how we can affect people this way. It's like, if you're willing to really trust and go there, right? Sometimes it can bring up the fears in other people, because they're going to have to go there with you. They're going to have to trust and go there. And sometimes I get self-conscious when I don't really like being filmed either, to be honest with you. So I don't really like it, but I love it for the projects that we're doing. I love the things that we've been doing, and it's worth it to me but the fears come up. The fears come up, and I have to kind of deal with them. And that's when I think most people, when they're afraid, they want to control, they want to plan it out, they want to know what's going to happen. It's what we all do, right? And the only problem with that is, like, hey, guess what? It's going to change your art. You're going to change the outcome at that point.
You know what that reminds me of? There was this wedding video on TikTok, and the kid is waiting with the groom, and then the mother comes in the white dress, and the kid goes, "Mama!" And he runs down the aisle and gives her a big hug, and it made the whole wedding even better. Yeah. But everyone was commenting, "Oh, he ruined it. He ruined her reveal." I'm like, he was the fucking highlight of her reveal.
Yeah.
And it was so cute and adorable. And it's just like, that's a great example of, like, why you need to embrace accidents.
Yeah.
Because it will make it more beautiful if you look for it and you know how to work with an accident.
And that's one of the main reasons that I did music, decided to study music and go formally and, like, spend as much time as I could, because to me it's a metaphor for life. And in improvisations, no mistakes, right? You don't even have time. You don't regret the last note. You just move on, right? Yep. And I'm still trying to apply that to my life at large, right? To just not be afraid of the accidents, to just pivot, take everything as an opportunity. It's all about the way you view it and your perception. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that I guess, like, listen, I could... things are heavy for me right now. I'm having stuff go on with me. But that being said, music has always been that thing for me that helps me, come back to myself. And I'm the same way. I'll be learning for the rest of my life. As long as I can keep learning with music, I think everything else life throws at me, I'm going to be able to handle. And my dream is, maybe not in this lifetime, but some lifetime, to, like, have, like, a Jedi mind and just be able to deal with life the way that I deal with music, you know?
I think we all want that.
Right.
I have one more idea to close this episode. Okay. So initially, No Sense was always played in this chord. What was this chord?
C.
C?
I don't know.
Well, hold on.
Yeah, C.
How did you reverse engineer it into, like, a D?
Oh, well, I didn't
so
really.
If we want to play your version, how do we do that?
Well, we can play your version if you like. But all I did was I basically raised it a whole. Let me show you on the piano.
Okay.
Okay, so all I did was, so the interesting thing is that it sits on C a lot in this, but in reality it's in the key of G. So all I did was, because of my singing voice, I raised it up one whole step. And I just did the whole song from that place. So I didn't really reverse engineer it, although I'm confused because I think I might have changed some of the chords for it. I mean, I did all this a while ago, and I'm looking at my notes from it. So I might have changed some of the chords too, but that's all I did, right? So you just go, instead of C to E minor, I'm just D to F sharp, right? And so in reality, now I'm in the key of A. So I'm still, when I was in the key of G, I was playing the 4 and the 6 minor chord to start. And now I'm doing the same thing in the key of A, 4 and 6 minor. So it's just a key change. I didn't really, honestly, I think I only changed the key, but I'm not sure about that because some of the chords I might have changed those up too. But I basically moved it to the key of A and then sort of played around with the chords there. So does that explain it?
Yes, thank you.
But we can play it in C.
Yeah?
If you want. Or let me hear how you do it, because let me hear you play it.
This is how I do it. It's this sort of, so the low notes are, this is how stupid I am when it comes to like guitar theory. The low notes are a C, so this is a C, but the high notes are a G. So it's like C, G. And then it goes to an E minor, but with the high notes still on G.
Okay.
And then it slides up. So I have no idea what this chord is, but it goes.
D.
You know what that is? Yeah. Okay. Back to C, G.
Wait, maybe I don't know. Can you do it again?
You have a good
Can you
ear.
do one note at a time?
E.
What is it? And the next one?
It's on the A string, so if we count up, A.
Is it just 2 notes?
No, it's the sol. Oh, it's the sol chord. Oh, it's this. Oh, I know what this is. Is that an E? Or is that a D?
It sounded like a D.
Oh, that's a D because
Is it a
it's on the
D?
5th fret.
Okay.
So, and then it would be, what's before a D? That would be C sharp. Is there a C sharp?
Oh, so you're doing like a D7.
So it's
That's a D7.
does that sound right? This is so cool.
I think it's like this. I think that's it. Okay.
All right, so it goes from G, C to E minor to that weird chord, back to G, C,
Okay.
E minor, and then it's got this walk down. So it's open E, ooh, yeah.
Okay. So let's try it.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. Again. Can you go on the clip
Just
for a
keep
minute?
going?
Yeah. No, just do that progression over and over
Okay.
for a second. I still don't quite have it. But can you sing and do the whole thing?
I would need my printout that I put up on Ultimate Guitar.
Okay, but because that's only the first part, right?
Yeah. Well, that's sort of like. Let's see how far I go before I forget it.
All right. That's right though. Let me see. I have it online. So it's like. Lost my mind. Nothing but haze of you. I think you're doing like. I think you're doing something like that.
Yeah, I don't. Jeff Cusack, guitar. Okay, here we go. So that would be climb every mountain, don't care how E minor. Swim every ocean that I can find. Walk every city and passers by. Do every drug and blow my mind, dear. Just to see you again, to see you again. Is that D sus4?
Yeah, that sounds like it.
It's D sus4. Then the chorus is G, C add 9. Things don't make sense as time slips by. Might feel okay, D, if I could cry. C add 9, the look of your face, it makes me dream. Wouldn't care if I could scream. I cling to thoughts, what you said doesn't help, you're in my head.
Oh, I think I did like really change the song up.
Yeah, it
It's
sounds
really different.
Yeah. I like how different it is, though. I think that's what covers should be. They should just be
Yeah, I think
completely
so too.
unique.
Don't make sense as time slips by. That's what you're doing. You're going back to the G.
So it's like, yeah, things don't make sense as time slips by. Maybe okay.
Do
face is C add 9.
What?
The look of your face is C add 9. That's one of those things that Taylor corrected for me.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't have thought to go there.
Okay. Things don't make sense as time slips by. Might be okay if I could cry. Though your face makes me dream. I'd be okay if I could scream.
I've come to thoughts and what you say doesn't help you
So what other songs do you know?
Okay, so
That'd be too hard.
all right, let's see here.
And I don't know how much more time we have before somebody's gonna come in. Do you want to do the Mellencamp?
Do you want to do that one? Let me get my pick.